Before we dive into one of the most underrated but powerful stories of wisdom, beauty, and divine timing in the Bible, make sure you hit that subscribe button, like this video, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another epic Bible story brought to life. This is the story of Abigail, a woman whose wisdom saved her entire household, and who went from being married to a fool to becoming the wife of a king. You do not want to miss this. Now, in a time when Saul was king of Israel and chasing David like a predator through the wilderness, trying to kill the one already anointed by God to be his successor, David was out in the rugged desert with his band of mighty men, hiding in caves, dodging spears, and staying faithful to God despite being unfairly hunted. David and his men, hungry and weary, found themselves near the wilderness of Paran, around the area of Maon, where a very rich man named Nabal lived. Nabal was a wealthy sheep master, owning 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and he was shearing his sheep in Carmel, a time of celebration and feasting for landowners. But while his flocks grazed in the wilderness, David and his men had watched over them, offering protection like invisible guardians, expecting nothing in return. This Nabal, whose name literally meant fool, was as harsh and evil in his dealings as he was rich in material possessions, and though he was of the house of Caleb, a tribe known for courage, Nabal was the type of man who would sooner count coins than count the kindness of others. However, his wife, Abigail, was a completely different story. She was intelligent, beautiful, and wise, a glowing gem hidden in a house of shadows. So when David, hearing that Nabal was shearing his sheep and likely hosting a feast, sent 10 of his young men to respectfully ask for food and supplies, not demanding, but reminding Nabal of the protection they had offered his flocks, it was expected that a decent man would respond with generosity. But Nabal, true to his foolish name, answered with contempt, asking, "Who is David, and who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who break away from their masters." He accused David of rebellion and flat out refused to give anything, mocking him as if he were some runaway servant. The messengers returned and delivered Nabal's insult, and David, the man after God's own heart, the warrior shepherd, was not having it. Fury lit in his eyes as he strapped on his sword and ordered 400 of his men to do the same. "Every male in Nabal's household will be dead by morning," David swore, burning with righteous anger. Meanwhile, back at Nabal's estate, a servant who had witnessed everything ran to Abigail, the wise wife, and told her of David's men coming in peace, of their kindness in the wilderness, and of how Nabal had insulted them and sent them away empty-handed. The servant knew disaster was coming, and he also knew that if anyone could prevent it, it was Abigail. She wasted no time. Acting swiftly and wisely, Abigail prepared a generous offering: 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, roasted grain, raisins, figs, a royal feast fit for warriors. She loaded them onto donkeys and told her servants to go ahead, while she followed behind. She did not tell her husband, Nabal, what she was doing, likely because she knew he would either forbid her or ruin the effort. As she rode down the hidden path through the hills, David and his men were coming up from the opposite direction, swords ready, hearts pounding with the taste of vengeance. Then, suddenly, there she was, Abigail, descending like a dove into a storm, dismounting her donkey and falling on her face before David. She humbled herself, not because she was weak, but because she was wise. She begged David to let the blame fall on her and asked to speak to him. With humility and eloquence, she reminded David of his destiny, that he was chosen by the Lord, that he fought the battles of God, and that shedding blood out of rage would only create regret when he took the throne. "When the Lord has brought my Lord success," she said, "do not let this be a burden on your conscience." David was stunned. Here stood a woman of wisdom and beauty, speaking words that pierced his anger and called him back to his true self. He lifted his eyes and blessed her, saying, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed." He accepted her gifts and told her to go home in peace. The wrath of David had been turned away by one woman's courage and wisdom. Abigail returned home, and there was Nabal, holding a feast fit for a king, drunk and clueless, celebrating as if his life was not hanging by a thread. Abigail waited until the next morning, when the wine had worn off, and then told Nabal what had almost happened, how David had been on his way to destroy him, and how she had intervened. When Nabal heard this, his heart failed him, and he became like stone. 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he praised God for avenging the insult without David having to lift a hand. And then, in a stunning twist of fate, David sent for Abigail and asked her to be his wife. And so, after the sudden and dramatic death of Nabal, a man whose arrogance nearly cost his entire household their lives, Abigail found herself at the edge of a new chapter, one that no wise woman could have fully anticipated. Word had reached David in the wilderness that Nabal had died, struck by the hand of the Lord, and with that news came not just relief, but reverence, as David lifted up his voice in thanksgiving, recognizing that God had protected him from staining his hands with innocent blood. "Blessed be the Lord," David said, "who has upheld my cause against Nabal for insulting me, and has kept his servant from doing wrong." But what David also recognized was the woman, Abigail, whose wisdom and courage had been the divine instrument to halt a coming storm. And so, moved by respect, admiration, and perhaps something deeper stirring in his heart, David sent messengers to Abigail with a proposal, not of war or tribute, but of marriage. When those messengers arrived at Abigail's home and delivered David's message, telling her that he had sent them to take her to be his wife, her response was full of grace and humility. She bowed with her face to the ground and said, "Here is your maidservant, ready to serve you and wash the feet of my Lord's servants." This was no flattery, no performance. It was the voice of a woman who had known what it meant to serve, to be married to a fool, to live in wisdom while surrounded by folly, and now to be invited into the life of a man after God's own heart. Without hesitation, Abigail got ready, mounting a donkey with her 5 maidservants accompanying her, and she rode off with David's men, entering a completely different world from the one she had known, from the house of Nabal to the wilderness of David. She became David's wife, not just because of her beauty, though Scripture mentions it, but because of her heart, her discernment, and her rare ability to see the larger picture, to see destiny when it passed by in sandals and dust, carrying both sword and sorrow. At this point, David had also taken another wife, Ahinoam of Jezreel, after Michal, Saul's daughter and David's first wife, had been given to another man by her father during David's exile. So now Abigail joined the growing household of the future king, a man still living in caves and among rebels, a man hunted and exiled, but chosen by God for the throne of Israel. Abigail adapted to this life not with complaint, but with quiet strength. She was no stranger to survival or hardship, and now she walked beside a man whose journey was as uncertain as it was prophetic. But her wisdom, again and again, proved to be one of David's greatest treasures. Through battles, betrayals, and exiles, Abigail stood by David as he continued to evade Saul, and as he eventually ascended to kingship over Judah in Hebron, and later over all Israel. Though much of Abigail's later life is not detailed in Scripture as dramatically as her first encounter with David, the impact of her story endures through the layers of meaning it carries. Abigail represents the power of intervention, how one act of wisdom, spoken at the right moment, can change the course of violence and redirect a man from vengeance to virtue. She also represents the transformation from suffering to honor, going from being the wife of a man whose name meant fool to becoming the wife of Israel's most revered king. Her life was not defined by her surroundings, but by her response to them. While many women in ancient times were silenced or overshadowed, Abigail's voice cut through pride and wrath and brought peace when the sword was drawn. Even more, her story foreshadows the wisdom of Christ, intervening on behalf of those who do not deserve it, bringing mercy instead of destruction. Abigail is not merely a side character in David's rise to power. She is a pivotal turning point. Had David slaughtered Nabal's household in anger, it would have stained his record with unnecessary bloodshed. But Abigail stood between wrath and ruin, like a bridge of grace. Her story echoes through the ages, reminding us that true strength is not just in battle, but in wisdom, and that sometimes it is the quiet, brave words of a wise woman that hold the most power in the unfolding of God's plans. We never read of Abigail clashing with others in the palace, nor do we hear scandal or bitterness. She was content with her role, but her influence spoke louder than any crown or title. She had already proven herself in the wilderness long before entering a royal court. As David became king and ruled over a united Israel, Abigail faded from the forefront of the narrative, but not from the legacy of faith. She was likely a mother to one of David's sons. Specifically, Scripture tells us she bore a son named Chileab, also called Daniel in 1 Chronicles, though he does not play a major role in later events. Still, Abigail's true inheritance was not her offspring's fame, but her moment of glory when she chose to act. One day, a foolish man dismissed the future king with insults, but a wise woman rode out with bread, figs, and peace in her hands. And through her courage, a nation was spared a tragedy, and a king was reminded of the path of righteousness. That is the power of a godly woman in the right place at the right time. That is Abigail, forgotten by some, overlooked by many, but forever remembered by God. If this story stirred something in you, inspired you, or just reminded you that God can use wisdom to change the world, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with someone who needs to know the power of divine timing and bold faith.